Welcome to Pomo Bespoke. 2 weeks ago, I made a video showing my ideas about how to craft a pair of derby boots. A week ago, at the request of a member of the channel, I made another video showing how to incorporate bellow tongues to derby boots. Now that led me into crafting like a mock-up, kind of like a proof of concept, to satisfy myself that my ideas about the bellow tongues were actually workable. This week and in this video, I hope to show you some changes that I made to the patterns of the bellow tongue, and at the end I'll show you why those changes were ultimately not such a good idea. Why am I showing you my mistakes? So that you can learn from them and not make them. So welcome again to Pomo Bespoke. I hope you find this video very rewarding. Subscribe to the channel if you've not already done that. Let's get on with it. This is the quarter. All we need to do is cut out just one part, and it's basically just cutting it out from the design that you already have. So quarter all done. Let's get to the counter. So the way this boot is designed is that we really do not need to do any counter stiffness. We can just add an extra panel of leather at the back there. Good thing is I'm using vegetable tan leather all through on the mock-up that I'm doing. So cut out this counter at the back like so, and basically duplicate it. It will fit in at the back right there, just an added layer on top of the quarter, and that will be that for the counter. So we've duplicated the counter. Now let's go to the elephant in the room, the vamp. Why do I call it the elephant in the room? Of course it will need to be sprung, so we will deal with the concept of springing the vamp. So this is the panel basically cut out from the design, and as you can see, I have marked 1 cm to the right and to the left of the vamp line, and basically draw a right angle from those 1 cm marks. Of course, right angle to their corresponding sides of the center line. And now let's get on with springing this vamp. So I'll place those 2 points 1 cm away from the vamp point on the center line, and then draw in the under part around as you saw there. Then I'll use that point as pivot and draw in the under part of this side. Go back to that point, rotate it to where we started off from, and then use this second point as pivot and rotate it to the center line. And then draw in the rest of the pattern of the vamp. With this, I have basically duplicated or sprung the vamp, put it in a position where I can duplicate it. But one final check, let's check the total length that we had on the pattern before we sprung. 11.4 plus about 4 cm, 11.4 plus 4 cm, that gives us 15.4 cm. If we measure the length of the entire sprung thing, you'll see that that is from there to here is 15 added to 4 cm exactly. So we sprung correctly, the total length is exactly the same, and we can go ahead and cut out the sprung pattern. Before we do that, we mark in this point, which is reflective of that point on the design. And then there is also the extra point where the quarter slots into the vamp. I forgot to add that in. You'd see in a while that I will just go ahead and do that. So that's the point I was talking about. So you notice that the quarter will slot into the vamp at that point, just this particular point right here. So I will just find where it corresponds on the panel that we cut out earlier on and transfer that to the sprung pattern before we start duplicating. So there it is right here. I marked that in there. Basically, I'll just take this point and transfer it to the sprung pattern, placing of course the tongue side line straight on the center line, and with that we can mark that point in and basically cut out our already sprung vamp pattern. Not forgetting of course to add in a stitching allowance at this point, because of course the quarter is going to slot into that point, so it will need a stitching allowance where we will stitch it onto the vamp. And then I cut in my tracing channels and we are done with the vamp. Now let's get to the tongue and the very point of this video. In the first video, I showed you how I made my tongue. The key things that I did, of course, basically we need to spring this because as you can see, it's a curve, it's not lying on a straight line. So we do exactly the same thing that we did with the vamp, which is mark 1 cm away from that center line that you see there. I'm scratching it out a bit because the cardboard that I'm using is black cardboard. I have to scratch it out a bit so that you can see it clearly on camera. So that dividing point, we drew a right angle from that point downwards, a right angle from that point downwards. Then place those 2 points and then mark in the back. Basically what we did when we sprung the vamp, and then using that point as pivot, we rotate towards the back until it lies on the center line. We draw in that point, take it back to where we started, then using the second point as pivot, rotate it to the center line and draw in the rest of the pattern. Of course, we will go ahead and, check the total length of what we sprung as against what we had on the curved pattern, the curved panel. So we check. 4.5. This is about 4.5 thereabouts.
4.5 plus 3.5 is 8. If this comes to 8, then we're correct.
So we have about 4.5 plus 3, which came to about 7.5, and you see total length is 7.5. So we have a correct sprung tongue, and then we will cut it out, having of course added our stitching allowance to that underside where it is going to slot into the rest of the vamp. Let me quickly go ahead and add in my tracing channels so that it's easy to trace out on leather, and you have that. Right, so if I was making a simple derby boot, there will be no need to do anything extra. This would have been just enough. I will attach my quarter to the vamp and we will be on our way to celebration. But what we set out to do in the first place is to make it a bellow. If you guys go back and rewatch the video that I made, the first bellow tongue video that I made, you see that I basically just made the tongue, just 4 parts of the tongue. So this same tongue, add one more side to the side, to one side, to the right side, and add another side to the left side. And that was what I used for the panel of the bellows. But in this case, I chose to use the side panel of the quarter. That was a grave mistake. Now, the idea was very cool on paper. The bellow is going to be stitched onto the side of that quarter, so why not use its pattern for the bellow wings? But leather and paper don't react in the same way, apparently, and of course it presented a whole lot of problems when it came to inserting the eyelets, like I mentioned before. So let me just breeze through what I did here. You can see that I added the side panel of the quarter to one side of that tongue and basically just duplicated it, cut in all of my tracing channels, and basically had this. On paper it looked wonderful. It looked theoretically like something that will really work. So these are all my pattern pieces, all cut out, all sprung, and all duplicated. There they are. And this is the almighty tongue with its bellow wings. So this is the quarter with the counter stitched onto it. You saw that pouch there. If we wanted to add any stiffeners, we could just basically stick it in there for extra reinforcement. Now this is where I noticed the problem. You see that with the way the side panel of the bellow is stitched on, your eyelets are not going to correspond, especially when you want to last it onto your last. So that was a big problem which I didn't have when I just duplicated one side of the tongue and corresponded it to the other. So for this particular mock-up, I basically cut out that wing of the bellow and just lasted it for testing. And as you saw, it lasted fairly properly. Just a few things to correct. So for the second leg of the pair, I used the earlier system that I did before. So you can see that that's the earlier system. The only disadvantage is that I had sewn the panel, so I had to now stitch onto stitches that I had made earlier on. Having coupled it, you see here that it's presenting a more sensible idea of the bellow. Now I must confess that I have seen American work boots with bellows that look less chunky than what I have. I've really not been able to wrap my head around how they work the pattern for those. So if you're out there watching and you want to help me out on that, I'll be very grateful. But this is what I came up to, fairly exactly like what I did before. The only difference is that in the former case, the point where I stitched on the bellow to the tongue was a little bit higher. In fact, I think I used the vamp line and then I protruded that tongue beyond the tongue was on the center line while the quarter went just about half a centimeter backwards. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the ideas that I have. These are my mock-ups, and this is a mock-up that I'm actually going to finish off, do some Goodyear welting on it, and being that it is vegetable tan leather, it will make a very good piece to patina. So I want to try my hands out again on patinaing this rather rough work boots. But that's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you learned something. I learned a whole lot about what I can and what I can't do from this project. Until I see you guys next time, God bless you. Peace.